Welcome to my educational channel on finance, banking, and other important subjects. I'm Sudham Ghosh, an ex-banking faculty and now a global instructor. In this video, we will understand what is diversion and siphoning of funds and how the funds are misutilized by the borrowers to cause NPAs in banks. Please watch the video till the end to fully comprehend the subject. If you find this video useful, would you consider to subscribe to my channel, like my video, share it among your community, and also provide valuable comments? That will provide me immense motivation to bring more useful videos in the future. Now, let's start the video. We need to first understand how the borrower should utilize the funds in the business. More than 90% of NPAs occur because the borrowers do not know how to utilize the funds. They have financial indiscipline and often misuse the funds that the banks provide. Let us therefore understand the fundamental principle of fund utilization. Okay? Take a balance sheet. In the balance sheet, you have the liabilities and the asset side. The liabilities are the sources of funds in the business, and the assets are the users of those funds. Any stakeholder will be interested to know how the business has acquired the funds and how those funds have been invested in the business. There are short-term sources of funds like cash credit, overdraft facilities from banks, trade creditors, outstanding expenses, advance from customers, and others. These are short-term liabilities of the business which have to be repaid within 12 months. Then there are short-term uses of funds that include stocks of raw materials, work in progress and finished goods, investments in receivables, cash and bank balances, prepaid expenses, and others. These are short-term assets of the business which convert into cash within 12 months. As you can see, the short-term sources are smaller than short-term uses. Obviously, there has to be long-term sources in the form of equity and long-term liabilities. That include shareholders' funds and reserves, debentures and term loans from banks and FIs. The equity and long-term liabilities are acquired for a longer period of over 12 months. Finally, there are long-term uses of funds that are long-term assets in the business. That include investments in fixed assets and investments in outside shares and outside properties. These long-term assets provide return only after a period of 12 months. As you can see, the short-term assets are not 100% funded by the short-term sources. The shortfall is funded by long-term sources in the form of equity and long-term liabilities. This part of the short-term assets that is funded by the equity and long-term liabilities is known as net working capital. Okay? All right. Now, how will the borrower utilize the funds in the day-to-day business? The short-term funds may be utilized to fund the short-term assets. It is okay. It is acceptable. Why? Because short-term assets are converted into cash within 12 months. It will match the repayment period of the short-term funds. Therefore, at the end of 12 months, there will be no liability of the borrower to outsiders. Then the long-term funds may be used to fund the long-term assets, which is fine. It is acceptable. Why? Just because long-term assets take a long time to bear fruit. It is likely to match the repayment periods of the long-term liabilities. It will not create any liquidity issue. The long-term funds may also be used to fund the short-term assets, which is very good. It is an ideal condition. Why is it considered ideal? Because funding of the short-term assets by equity and long-term sources provides the necessary comfort or cushion to the borrower. This working capital is also known as borrower's margin. But the borrower should never and ever try to use the short-term funds to finance the long-term assets. It is extremely dangerous and it is not at all acceptable. Let us see the consequence. The short-term funds are the gross working capital funds of the borrower, which is required for day-to-day business requirement. If the funds are utilized for long-term purposes, the short-term funds would be locked and the borrower will face serious liquidity problem. Okay, what happens if the borrower uses short-term funds to finance fixed assets? It would amount to diversion of funds. Look, the short-term funds have to be repaid within 12 months, whereas the investments in fixed assets will take more than 12 months to provide return to the borrower. Therefore, the borrower will not be able to pay within the stipulated period. As a result, the borrower will default and the account will turn NPA. And what happens if the borrower invests in short-term funds to purchase outside investments? It would result in siphoning of funds. Investments in outside shares or properties mean that the borrower takes out the funds from the business and invests in some other business, which is highly dangerous. In diversion, the funds remain within the business, whereas in siphoning, the funds go out of the business. We will take a case study and look at the diversion and siphoning through fund flow analysis from a closer angle. Here, we will analyze the fund flow and understand critically. There are three companies, X, Y, and Z. Look at the long-term sources of funds that are extracted from the fund flow statement. All are 200 million. Similarly, the short-term sources are also given. It is 100 million for X, Y, and Z. Let us now look at its long-term uses and short-term uses. Now, look at the long-term uses. Company X has spent the whole amount, Company Y has spent 50%, and Company Z has spent more than the long-term source. Okay, now look at the short-term uses. Company X has spent 100 million, Company Y has spent 200 million, and Company Z has spent 80 million. Let us now analyze and find out which company is comfortably placed and which company is uncomfortable. Company X or Company Y or Company Z. Okay? What we will do, we will rearrange the figures and compare long-term sources with long-term uses. Similarly, we will compare short-term sources with short-term uses. Okay? First, the long-term funds. The long-term sources, then the long-term uses. Okay? Let us now compare. What is the long-term surplus or deficit in the long-term funds? For Company X, it is 0, meaning there is no surplus or no deficit. They remain intact. For Company Y, there is a surplus of 100 million. And for Company Z, there is a deficit of 20 million, right? Very good. Let us now compare the short-term funds. The short-term sources are 100 million for Company X, Company Y, and also Company Z. Then the short-term uses for Company X are 100 million, 200 million for Company Y, and 80 million for Company Z. Let us compare. What is the short-term surplus or short-term deficit? For Company X, there is no surplus and no deficit. It is 0. For Company Y, there is a deficit of 100 million. And for Company Z, there is a surplus of 20 million. Let us now analyze the financial performance of the companies. Company X is most disciplined. There is no surplus or deficit either in the long term or in the short term, right? Let us critically analyze other two companies. Let us take Company Y. The short-term uses are 200 million, whereas the short-term source is 100 million. Here there is a short-term deficit of 100 million. Company Y has adjusted this deficit from the long-term surplus of 100 million. That means the Company Y has contributed 100 million from long-term source towards short-term source. As a result, there is positive growth of its net working capital, which will boost its operational efficiency. We can therefore say that company Y is most comfortably placed. How about company Z? The long-term users are 220 million, whereas the long-term source is only 200 million. Now, how did it spend 220 million when it had only 200 million? From where did the balance 20 million come? It came from short-term source. There is a short-term surplus of 20 million. So, company Z has utilized the short-term source to manage the long-term use. This is a clear case of fund diversion or siphoning. That is, utilizing short-term source to fund the long-term use. If the short-term funds are used for financing fixed assets, then it would be diversion of funds. And if the short-term funds are used for financing investments, then it would be siphoning of funds. The borrowers are smart people and they need regular monitoring. The credit officer should carefully analyze the fund flow statement to detect and prevent any diversion or siphoning of banks' funds. Okay? Thanks for watching the video till the end. Do let me know in the comment section any particular subject you want me to present for your sake. In the end, please do not forget to subscribe, like, share and comment on this video. We will meet in the next video. Goodbye.